Stop. Before you read another self-help book that makes you feel good for 48 hours and then disappears into the fog of your daily routine. I need you to hear something. You are not behind in life because of bad luck. You are not stuck because the economy is broken. You are not unfulfilled because the right opportunity hasn't shown up yet. You are where you are because of what happens inside your skull, approximately 60,000 times a day. That's how many thoughts the average American brain generates every single day. 60,000 mental events. And research from the National Science Foundation suggests that of those thoughts, 80% are negative and 95% are the exact same thoughts you had yesterday. Read that again. You are essentially replaying the same mental movie, day after day, and wondering why the plot never changes. This book is not here to comfort you. This book is here to shake you awake. Because somewhere along the way, most people made an unconscious agreement. They agreed to wait for the right moment, wait for someone to believe in them, wait until they feel ready, wait until life gets easier. And while they waited, their most powerful asset, their mind, ran completely unsupervised, like a loaded weapon left on a kitchen counter. Here's the truth that will either liberate you or terrify you. No one is coming to save your mind. That job has always been yours. The people who design extraordinary lives, the entrepreneurs who built companies from nothing, the athletes who defied biology, the artists who created work that outlasted them. They didn't have better circumstances. They had better thinking architecture. They stopped being passengers in their own consciousness and became the engineers of it. That's what this book teaches. Not positive thinking, not manifesting, not affirmations you whisper into a mirror while hoping something magically changes. This is a manual for thought sovereignty, the radical, science-backed ability to govern your own mind with the precision of a master conductor and the intentionality of an architect who knows exactly what they're building. By the time you finish this book, you will understand why your brain keeps running the same loops. You will know how to break those loops. And you will have a practical daily system for replacing them with thought patterns that actually build the life you came here to live. The waiting ends here. Let's build your sovereign mind. You are not your thoughts, but you've been acting like you are. There is a moment, and if you pay close attention today, you might catch it, where a thought enters your mind and you immediately become it. Not observe it, not evaluate it, become it. Someone cuts you off in traffic on the I-95 and within 0.3 seconds, you're not just a person who witnessed a minor traffic incident. You are a furious human being absolutely certain that the world is filled with careless, selfish people and that this is why your day is ruined. Or you check your bank account on a Tuesday morning and a number appears on a screen, just digits, and suddenly you are a failure. You are behind. You are proof that your father's warnings were right and your dreams were foolish. A thought arose, and you became it. This is the central illusion of human experience, and it is costing you everything. Here is what neuroscience, contemplative wisdom, and the hard-won experience of every person who ever genuinely transformed their life agrees on: you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that observes them. Sit with that for a moment, because it's not a philosophical nicety. It's a structural fact about how your mind works. Right now, as you read these words, there is a part of you that is noticing the reading happening. There is a witness behind your eyes. And that witness, that observing awareness, is not the same as the content of what's being observed. Think of it this way. A movie screen is not the movie. No matter how violent, romantic, frightening, or beautiful the film playing on it, the screen itself remains unchanged. Your awareness is that screen. Thoughts are the movie. When you forget this distinction, you become the movie. You get pulled into every scene, react to every plot twist, and feel every emotion as though it's your permanent reality rather than a passing frame. When you remember this distinction, you become the screen, present, stable, capable of observing thoughts without being consumed by them, and therefore capable of choosing which thoughts deserve your energy and which ones deserve to be let go. The science of the observer. This isn't mysticism. Dr. Daniel Siegel at UCLA has spent decades studying what he calls mind sight, the human brain's capacity to observe its own mental processes. His research shows that people who develop this observer perspective demonstrate measurably greater emotional regulation, reduced anxiety, and dramatically improved decision-making. The act of watching your own thoughts, what psychologists call metacognition, actually changes the brain. When you observe a thought rather than automatically react to it, you activate the prefrontal cortex, the brain's CEO, rather than defaulting to the amygdala, the brain's panic button. This switch, from reactive to observant, is the foundation of everything this book teaches. And the beautiful, somewhat humbling reality is this: most people never make this switch. Not because they can't, because nobody ever showed them it was an option. You were taught reading, writing, arithmetic. You were taught history, geography, chemistry. But were you ever sat down and taught how to watch your own mind? Were you ever shown the difference between having a thought and being that thought? Almost certainly not. And so you've been living inside the movie, reacting to every scene, exhausted by a film you didn't choose, when you had the ability to step back, observe the screen, and pick a different feature at any time. The untrained dog analogy, reimagined. Most motivational content compares an unmanaged mind to an untrained dog. That's useful, but let's go deeper. Imagine you own a 24-hour television studio. It runs non-stop, and you are both the network executive and the only viewer. Now imagine you've never once stepped into the control room. You've just been sitting in the audience, watching whatever programming the autopilot system decided to air. Fear documentaries at 3 a.m., reruns of your most embarrassing moments at breakfast, disaster prediction specials every time you have a meeting with your boss, highlight reels of everyone else's life at 7 p.m., right when your insecurities are warmest. That's an unmanaged mind. Now imagine walking into the control room for the first time. You see the switchboard, you see the schedule, you see which programs have been running on loop for 15, 20, 30 years, and you realize you have the authority to change the programming. Not all at once, not perfectly, but deliberately, intentionally, with increasing skill. That is what this book is going to teach you to do. Why most people never enter the control room. If this power is available to everyone, why do so few people use it? 3 reasons. First, familiarity feels like truth. When a thought has been playing on your internal broadcast channel for 20 years, it no longer feels like a thought. It feels like a fact. I'm not creative. Money is hard to come by. People like me don't succeed at that level. These aren't facts. They are old programs running in a brain that stopped questioning them decades ago. Second, discomfort is misread as danger. When you start observing your thoughts instead of automatically believing them, it feels strange, disorienting. Your mind will resist this shift and interpret the unfamiliar feeling as a sign that something is wrong. It isn't. That discomfort is the sensation of old neural wiring being loosened. It's not a warning. It's a sign of progress. Third, the culture of waiting. This is perhaps the most insidious. Western culture, and American culture in particular, has developed a sophisticated mythology around the idea that something external will eventually fix your internal world, the right relationship, the right salary, the right president, the right moment when the stars align and life finally cooperates. But here is a question nobody asks loudly enough. What if you've been waiting for something to happen when the something that needs to happen is inside you? Waiting is not neutral. Every day you spend waiting for external conditions to improve your inner world is a day your unconscious mind spends strengthening the very patterns that created those external conditions. You don't wait your way to a sovereign mind. You build one. And it starts with stepping into the control room. Right now, today, with the next thought you choose to engage. The thought audit. Here is your first practical exercise. Do it today. For 1 hour, just one, become a thought journalist. You don't need a notebook. You don't need an app. You simply need to pause 3 times within that hour and ask, what was I just thinking? Not what should I be thinking? Not is this thought good or bad? Simply, what was the last thought running through my mind? You will likely be surprised. Many people discover that their automatic thoughts fall into predictable categories: worry about the future, replay of past mistakes, comparison with others, self-criticism, or low-grade anxiety about things beyond their control. These patterns are your current programming. You can't change what you can't see, and now you're starting to see. The operating system running your life, and why it's probably outdated. Every device you own runs on software, and every piece of software has a version number because the people who built it understood something fundamental. What was cutting edge in 2005 is a liability in 2025. Your mind works the same way. Right now, your brain is running an operating system that was largely written before you were 10 years old. The core files, your beliefs about worthiness, safety, capability, and possibility, were installed during a period in your life when your brain was in what neuroscientists call a high download state. Between birth and age 7, the human brain operates primarily in theta brainwave patterns, which are the same waves associated with deep hypnosis. During this window, you absorbed everything around you, not through critical analysis, but through direct installation. What your parents said about money, installed. What your teachers communicated about intelligence, installed. What your neighborhood demonstrated about what was possible, installed. How conflict was handled in your household, installed. What love looked like, what safety required, what success meant, all installed without your conscious consent. And then you grew up and walked into the world running software that nobody ever asked you to review, update, or question. The conscious and subconscious divide. Here's the part that most people find either fascinating or deeply unsettling, often both. Your conscious mind, the part reading these words, making decisions, setting goals, processes approximately 40 bits of information per second. Your subconscious mind processes 11 million bits per second. The math on this is staggering. Your unconscious mind is processing roughly 275,000 times more information than your conscious mind at any given moment. And it's running those old files, the ones installed before you had the developmental capacity to evaluate them, as the operating architecture beneath every thought, feeling, and decision you believe you're consciously making. This is why intelligent, educated, motivated people can want change desperately, and still find themselves repeating the same patterns year after year. It's not weakness, it's not lack of willpower, it's a software conflict. The conscious system wants the upgrade, but the subconscious is still running the original code. The morning commute test. Here's a simple way to understand how deeply your subconscious programming drives your daily experience. Think about the last time you drove a familiar route, maybe your morning commute or the drive to the grocery store you've gone to for years. Did you consciously think about every turn? Did you deliberately calculate when to brake, when to accelerate, how much pressure to apply to the steering wheel? Of course not. Your subconscious handled all of it while your conscious mind wandered to your to-do list, your conversations, your plans for the weekend. Now, apply this to your thoughts about yourself. When you walk into a job interview or approach someone you're attracted to or stand up to speak in front of a group, do you consciously choose the thoughts that arise? Or do they appear automatically, preloaded from years of accumulated programming about what you're capable of, how others perceive you, and whether you're likely to succeed? For most people, those moments run on autopilot, which means they run on old code. The good news, and this is genuinely extraordinary news, is that autopilot can be reprogrammed. The brain is not a fixed archive. It is a living, adaptive, constantly reorganizing structure that responds to new input. And you can provide that input deliberately. How old programs create present limitations. Let's get specific, because this is where the theory becomes personal. Consider a woman, let's call her Diane, who grew up in a household where her father worked constantly and still never seemed to have enough. The dinner table conversations about money were always tinged with stress. We can't afford that. Money doesn't grow on trees. Rich people got that way by stepping on everyone else. Diane is now 38. She has a master's degree. She is talented, hardworking, and genuinely capable. She runs a small business that has real potential. But every time an opportunity arrives to scale, to invest in marketing, to hire a team, to raise her prices, something happens inside her, a tightening, a voice. Who do you think you are? You don't know what you're doing. It'll all fall apart. She doesn't know why she always pulls back at the critical moment. She calls it fear. Her friends call it perfectionism. Her therapist calls it imposter syndrome. What it actually is, a 30-year-old program running in her subconscious that was installed at a kitchen table in a house she no longer lives in by a man who was doing his best with the beliefs he had inherited. That program is not Diane. But until she sees it clearly, until she walks into the control room and identifies the software, it will continue to govern her choices more powerfully than any conscious goal she sets. The 4 steps of software replacement. Reprogramming your mental operating system is not magic. It follows a predictable sequence. Step 1. Awareness. You cannot update software you don't know is running. The first step is becoming conscious of your automatic thought patterns, especially in high-stakes situations. What does your mind automatically generate when you face criticism, when you set a big goal, when you experience failure? These reactions are data. They're showing you the current code. Step 2. Questioning. Once you see the automatic pattern, you ask, is this true? Is this current? Does this serve the person I am today? Or is this a message from an environment I no longer inhabit? Most people never ask these questions because the thoughts feel so familiar that they mistake familiarity for validity. Step 3. Replacement. This is where new software gets installed. Not through wishful thinking, but through deliberate, consistent repetition of new thought patterns combined with emotional engagement. The brain changes through what neuroscientists call Hebbian learning. Neurons that fire together wire together. Repeat a new thought with feeling consistently, and you are literally building new neural infrastructure. Step 4. Integration. The new pattern gradually becomes automatic. What was once effortful, conscious thought becomes the new default. This is the goal. Not to have to work hard to think well, but to have rewired your defaults so that empowering thinking is what your brain reaches for automatically. This process takes time, but it is not complicated, and it is absolutely, demonstrably real. The operating system you've been running was written by other people in another era for a version of you that no longer exists. Isn't it time you wrote your own? The Thought Reality Engine: How What You Think Becomes. What You Live In, 1960. A Harvard Medical School researcher named Dr. Herbert Benson began studying something that the medical establishment found deeply uncomfortable: the idea that what a person thinks could directly affect their physical body. His research eventually produced what became known as the relaxation response, and launched an entire field of study demonstrating that thoughts, consistently held, produce measurable biological changes: heart rate, blood pressure, immune function, hormone levels. All of it shifts in response to the content and quality of your thinking, but the connection between thought and reality goes beyond biology. It reaches into every corner of your lived experience. Here's why. And the science behind it is as elegant as it is practical. The brain's search engine. Your brain contains a structure called the reticular activating system, the RAS. Think of it as Google, but running inside your skull 24 hours a day. The RAS is a neural filtering network that processes the roughly 11 million bits of sensory information your body receives every second and decides, based on your dominant thought patterns, what gets flagged as important and what gets filtered out. Here's a demonstration you've almost certainly experienced personally. Have you ever bought a new car, let's say a navy blue Honda CR-V, and then suddenly started seeing navy blue Honda CR-Vs absolutely everywhere? On the highway, in parking lots, at stoplights. You'd swear they multiplied overnight. They didn't. They were always there. Your RAS simply wasn't programmed to notice them before. Once you bought one, your dominant thoughts about that car gave your RAS a new search parameter, and it started highlighting matching results from an environment that hadn't changed at all. Now, apply this to your beliefs about yourself and your possibilities. If your dominant thought patterns are built around scarcity, there's never enough, I always fall short, success is for other people. Your RAS spends every waking hour scanning your environment for evidence that confirms those beliefs. It highlights every setback and filters out opportunities. Every failure gets cataloged. Every success gets dismissed as luck or coincidence. Conversely, if your dominant patterns run toward possibility, I'm capable of figuring this out, opportunities are everywhere, challenges are data. Your RAS highlights different information from the exact same environment. The conversation at a networking event that turns into a partnership. The feedback in a rejection letter that contains the key to a better approach. The unexpected connection between two ideas that becomes a breakthrough. Same world, different filter, completely different experience. This is not the law of attraction. This is neuroscience. And understanding it changes how you think about thought control, because it reveals that your thoughts are not just internal weather. They are the programming instructions for the most sophisticated pattern recognition system in the known universe. What you consistently think is what your brain learns to find. The emotion bridge. But the RAS is only one mechanism through which thoughts shape reality. The other, arguably more powerful, is the emotion bridge. Thoughts generate emotions. Emotions determine actions. Actions create outcomes, and outcomes reinforce thoughts. This cycle, thought to emotion, to action, to outcome, to thought, is the engine of your lived experience, and it runs continuously, with or without your awareness. Consider two people starting identical businesses. Same product, same market, same resources. Person A's dominant thought pattern: this is a massive risk. What if I fail? What if I've made a terrible mistake? These thoughts generate fear and anxiety, Fear and anxiety produce hesitant action, inconsistent marketing, apologetic sales conversations, a reluctance to invest fully. Hesitant action produces disappointing early results. Disappointing results reinforce the original fear. The loop tightens. Person B's dominant thought pattern. This is a learning process. Every obstacle is information. I'm building something real. These thoughts generate curiosity and resilience. Curiosity and resilience produce engaged action, consistent effort, confident communication, willingness to iterate. Engaged action produces better results, even through early setbacks. Better results reinforce the original mindset. The loop expands. Both people might face identical external challenges, but the thought-emotion-action engine they're running produces entirely different trajectories. This is why changing your thinking is not a soft, optional, feel-good practice. It is the most direct and powerful lever you have for changing your material circumstances. The compound interest of thought. Here's the concept that most people miss, and that the most successful people in any field intuitively understand. Thoughts compound. A single empowering thought chosen once has minimal direct impact, but a thought chosen consistently, every morning, every time you face a challenge, every time you evaluate your capabilities, compounds over weeks, months, and years into a completely different cognitive architecture. Warren Buffett is famous for saying that the most important investment you can make is in yourself. What he's describing at the neural level is the compound interest of deliberate thinking. Every time you choose a thought that expands your view of what's possible, you're making a deposit in an account that grows exponentially. And every time you let old limiting patterns run unchallenged, every time you agree with the voice that says this is too hard, I'm not good enough, who am I to think I could do this? You're making a withdrawal from the same account. The ledger is always running. The question is which direction it's moving. Seeds and soil, the garden metaphor. You've heard the garden analogy before. Plant good thoughts, reap good results. But let's go deeper than the bumper sticker version, because the mechanics matter. A garden has soil. The soil of your mind is your emotional state, your baseline mood, your stress levels, your sense of safety and possibility. When the soil is depleted, when you're chronically stressed, sleep-deprived, isolated, or running on caffeine and anxiety, even the best seeds struggle to grow. Tending your mental garden means tending the soil, not just the seeds. This means that thought control is not purely a mental exercise. It is a whole life practice that includes how you sleep, how you move your body, who you spend time with, what you consume, media, food, conversation, and how much intentional rest you allow yourself. The most sophisticated mental performance techniques fail in depleted soil. Before you try to plant new thoughts, ask yourself, what is the condition of my soil right now? A garden also has seasons. There will be periods in your mental life where growth is rapid and visible, where new thought patterns seem to take hold almost effortlessly. And there will be fallow seasons where the internal work feels invisible and unrewarding. Neither season is more important than the other. The fallow period is when roots deepen. When you persist through the seasons where nothing visible seems to be happening, you are building the foundation for the growth that comes next. And finally, a garden requires a gardener who shows up. Not occasionally, not when inspiration strikes. Consistently. On ordinary Tuesdays, when the weather is unremarkable and there's nothing particularly motivating about the day. Sovereignty over your mind is built on ordinary days, not dramatic ones. The people who transform their lives are rarely the ones who had the most powerful insight at a retreat in Colorado. They're the ones who came home from the retreat and showed up every unremarkable Tuesday, every mundane morning, and chose, again, to tend the garden. That is the work, and you are ready for it. Neuroplasticity, the science that rewrites everything you thought was fixed about you. For most of the 20th century, the dominant belief in neuroscience was essentially a sentence of limitation. The adult brain is fixed. Once you passed adolescence, the neural wiring you had was the neural wiring you kept. Personality, cognitive patterns, emotional tendencies, all of it, supposedly, was locked in by early adulthood. This belief seeped into culture, into self-help, into therapy, into the way parents talk to children, and the way adults talk to themselves. That's just who I am. I've always been this way. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. And then researchers discovered they were wrong. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally, comprehensively, revolution-level wrong. The discovery that changes everything. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize its structure, create new neural connections, and fundamentally rewire itself in response to experience, is perhaps the most significant discovery in the history of neuroscience. Your brain is not a fixed archive. It is a living, adaptive organ that is physically changing right now, as you read these words, in response to the thoughts you're thinking. Every thought you think activates a network of neurons. When the same thought is repeated, those neurons fire together repeatedly. And as they do, the connection between them strengthens. The pathway becomes faster, more efficient, more automatic. This is what neuroscientists mean when they say neurons that fire together wire together. Think of it in terms of a mountain trail. The first time you hike a new trail through dense forest, it's slow. The undergrowth is thick. You have to pay attention to every step. But after 100 hikes, the trail is clear, wide, and easy to follow. You can almost run it. Neural pathways work the same way. Repeated thoughts become highways. And the thoughts you've been thinking for 20, 30, 40 years? Those are 10-lane interstates in your brain, smooth, fast, and almost impossible to consciously override in the heat of a moment. This is why habits, including thought habits, are so difficult to break through willpower alone. You're not fighting a bad choice. You're fighting a 10-lane highway. But here's the extraordinary part. Those highways can be closed, and new trails can be built. The proof that will silence your doubts. In 1995, researchers at Harvard Medical School conducted a study that should have made front-page news everywhere. They took two groups of people who had no experience playing piano. One group physically practiced a simple 5-finger piano exercise for 2 hours daily over 5 days. The other group simply thought about practicing the same exercise for the same time. Mental rehearsal, with no physical contact with a piano. At the end of the study, both groups were tested. The physical practice group showed measurable improvement as expected, but the mental rehearsal group showed almost identical neural changes in the motor cortex, regions corresponding to the finger movements they had only imagined. Let that sink in. The brain built infrastructure for a skill that was never physically performed, purely on the basis of consistent, focused imagination. If that's what the brain can do with imagined piano practice, consider what it can do with deliberately chosen thought patterns practiced consistently over months and years. You are not a passenger waiting to arrive at who you will eventually become. You are an architect, actively building neural infrastructure with every thought you choose, or choose not to challenge. The 3 phases of neural rewiring. Understanding neuroplasticity is the theory. Using it requires understanding the process. Phase 1. Disruption. Before new pathways can be built, old ones must be weakened. This happens through conscious interruption of automatic patterns. Every time you notice a habitual thought and choose not to follow it to its usual destination, you're allowing that neural highway to begin the process of fading. Neuroscientists call this synaptic pruning, the brain's natural tendency to reduce resources to pathways that aren't being used. This phase is uncomfortable. The old thoughts feel urgent, compelling, and true. They feel this way not because they are true, but because they are fast. They're running on highways built over years. Your discomfort in this phase is not a sign that the work isn't working. It's a sign that the old patterns are losing their dominance. Phase 2. Construction. Alongside disrupting old patterns, you're simultaneously building new ones through deliberate, consistent practice of chosen thought patterns. The key word is consistent, not intense, not dramatic. Consistent. 5 minutes of deliberate new thinking every morning is worth more than an emotional breakthrough you have once and then forget. The brain builds pathways through repetition, not through the occasional volcanic insight. Phase 3. Automaticity. Over time, weeks, months, depending on the depth of the original pattern, the new pathway becomes the default. The old highway fades to a dirt trail. The new trail becomes the highway. What was once effortful, conscious thought becomes automatic. This is the goal. Not to have to work at thinking well, but to have rewired your defaults so that empowering thinking is your brain's first move. The myth of permanent personality. Perhaps the most liberating implication of neuroplasticity research is the demolition of the fixed personality myth. Culture loves labels. You're an anxious person. You're a pessimist. You're not a risk-taker. You're not creative. You're not good with people. These labels, absorbed from parents, teachers, past partners, old failures, feel like facts. They feel like descriptions of something immutable. They are not descriptions. They are patterns. Habitual neural patterns that were reinforced through enough repetition to feel like character. And patterns can change. This doesn't mean changing your personality is easy or quick. It means it is possible, scientifically, structurally, demonstrably possible, in a way that the fixed brain model never allowed for. Dr. Michael Merzenich at UCSF, one of the pioneers of neuroplasticity research, demonstrated that even patients with severe neurological damage could develop new neural pathways to compensate for lost function. The brain found ways around its own damage. If the brain can root around physical damage, it can certainly root around old thinking patterns installed by a critical parent or a string of failures in your 20s. You are not your history. Your history is just a map, and maps can be redrawn. The daily practice that builds the new brain. Neuroplasticity theory gives us the why. Here's a simple daily structure for the how. Morning, 5 minutes. Before you check your phone, before the noise of the day begins, spend 5 minutes with a single empowering thought about who you are and where you're going. Not a laundry list, one clear thought held with intention and some emotional warmth. I am someone who handles challenges with clarity and confidence. Simple, repeated, daily. Throughout the day, the interrupt and redirect. When you catch an old limiting pattern arising, the familiar voice of self-doubt, comparison, or catastrophizing, practice a 3-second interrupt. Internally say pattern, not stop. Labeling it as a pattern is more neurologically effective than commanding it to stop. Then redirect to your chosen replacement thought. Evening, 3 minutes. Before sleep, identify one moment from the day where you chose an empowering thought over a limiting one. Acknowledge it deliberately. Savor it for 10 seconds. This activates the brain's reward circuitry and links positive feeling to the act of conscious thought selection, which makes it more likely to happen automatically tomorrow. This routine is not glamorous. It won't make you feel like you're having a transformation, But done consistently for 30 days, you will be demonstrably, measurably thinking differently, because your brain will have spent 30 days building new trails, and that is how sovereign minds are built. Not in an afternoon, in 30 ordinary mornings in a row. Breaking the loop. How to escape the mental patterns that have been running your life. The average person will have approximately the same thoughts today that they had yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. Not because they're intellectually limited, not because they lack imagination, but because the brain, in its relentless drive toward efficiency, converts repeated thought patterns into automatic loops, neural circuits that fire in sequence, self-reinforce, and run with minimal conscious fuel. These loops are the invisible architecture of your stuck points, and breaking them requires understanding exactly how they work. The anatomy of a thought loop. A thought loop follows a predictable structure. It has a trigger, some external event or internal state that activates the circuit. It has a habitual thought, the automatic interpretation that arises from the trigger. It has an emotional response, the feeling generated by that thought. And it has a behavioral consequence, what you do or don't do in response to that feeling. Here's an example. Trigger. You're preparing for a presentation at work. Your manager emails to ask for the slide deck. Habitual thought. They're checking because they don't trust my work. I'm probably going to disappoint everyone. Emotional response. Low-grade dread, self-consciousness. A sudden certainty that your preparation has been insufficient. Behavioral consequence. You spend 3 hours obsessively tweaking slides that were already good. You arrive at the presentation exhausted and nervous. You underperform slightly. The underwhelming performance reinforces the original belief. Round and round. The cruel elegance of a thought loop is that it creates the very evidence it uses to justify itself. The loop produces the outcome that confirms the loop. And unless something disrupts the circuit at one of its 4 points, trigger, thought, emotion, or behavior, it continues to run indefinitely. This is why insight alone rarely produces change. You can understand intellectually that your self-doubt is unfounded and still watch it govern your behavior, because insight hits the conscious mind while the loop runs in the subconscious. You need more than understanding. You need interruption. The art of the pattern. Interrupt a pattern. Interrupt is any deliberate action that disrupts the automatic sequence of a thought loop before it completes. The most effective pattern interrupts share one characteristic: they are physical. Because thought loops live in the brain, and the brain is part of the body, and the body responds to physical input in ways that directly affect neural states. The 5-breath interrupt. The moment you recognize a loop beginning to engage, stop everything and take 5 slow, deliberate breaths. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 6 counts out. This activates the parasympathetic nervous system, reduces cortisol, and shifts the brain out of the reactive state. That feeds thought loops. It sounds too simple to be powerful. It is not. The physical environment shift. Stand up, walk to a different room, step outside for 60 seconds. The brain associates thoughts with physical locations and body positions. Literally, changing your physical context disrupts the environmental cues that trigger habitual loops. The name it to tame it technique. Neuroscientist Dr. Matthew Lieberman at UCLA showed that simply labeling an emotional state in words reduces activity in the amygdala and increases activity in the prefrontal cortex. When you feel a loop beginning, that familiar anxious tightening, that creeping sense of inadequacy, say internally or aloud, "This is the not good enough loop running." Naming it activates your observer self and creates the gap between stimulus and response where conscious choice lives. The curiosity pivot. Instead of fighting the thought, which, as we've established, tends to amplify it, approach it with genuine curiosity. Interesting, that old pattern again. I wonder what triggered it this time. This reframes you as a researcher studying the loop rather than a victim of it. From that position, you have options. The 5 most common thought loops, and how to recognize yours. While thought loops are deeply personal, most fall into a handful of recognizable categories. The catastrophe loop. Triggered by uncertainty, this loop converts any ambiguous situation into its worst possible interpretation. A delayed text reply becomes a damaged relationship. An unclear comment from a boss becomes imminent job loss. The loop specializes in certainty about disasters that haven't happened. The comparison loop. Triggered by exposure to others' success, often via social media, this loop measures your internal reality against others' external presentation. Since you always have access to your own doubts, fears, and failures, but only others' highlight reels, this comparison is structurally rigged to produce inadequacy. The replay loop. Triggered by quiet moments or anything that resembles the original situation, this loop returns obsessively to past failures, embarrassments, or regrets. It positions itself as helpful, reviewing what went wrong so we can do better, but rarely produces useful information. It produces shame. The unworthiness loop. This is often the deepest loop, installed earliest. It questions your right to take up space, to want what you want, to succeed at the level you're capable of. It voices itself as realism. I'm just being honest about my limitations. It is not realism. It is old programming masquerading as self-awareness. The waiting loop. Triggered by any opportunity that requires commitment or risk, this loop generates an endless list of reasons why now is not the right time. More preparation is needed. Conditions aren't ideal. Wait until you're more ready, more funded, more experienced, more certain. This loop has stolen more potential from more people than any other pattern in this book. Recognize any of yours? Installing the replacement. Breaking a loop is half the work. The other half is installing something in its place, because the brain is not comfortable with emptiness, with a neural circuit that has been used to fire automatically simply going quiet. You need to give it a new destination, a replacement pattern that serves you rather than limits you. Replacement patterns are most effective when they meet 3 criteria. They must be believable. This is where many people go wrong with affirmations. Telling yourself, I am infinitely confident and unstoppable, when your current reality doesn't match that statement, creates a cognitive dissonance that your brain resolves by dismissing the affirmation. A believable replacement is 1 step ahead of where you are, not 20 steps. I am learning to trust myself is more effective than I am completely fearless. Believability is what allows new neural pathways to actually build. They must be emotionally engaged. A thought repeated mechanically, without any felt sense, builds far weaker neural pathways than one thought with genuine emotional investment. When you practice a replacement thought, bring an image with it. Feel the emotion of living from that thought. Even 30 seconds of genuine emotional engagement accelerates neural rewiring significantly. They must be consistent. Not intense, not dramatic, consistent. Repetition is the mechanism of neuroplasticity. A replacement thought practiced briefly every day for 30 days will produce measurably more neural change than the same thought practiced intensely for a single weekend. The loops running your life right now were not installed in a day. They will not be replaced in one either, but they will be replaced consistently, patiently, Thought by chosen thought. That is the craft of a sovereign mind. The voice in your head is not telling the truth, and it's time you stopped believing everything it says. There is a voice in your head. You know the one. It has opinions about everything you do. It narrates your failures with relentless precision and reviews your successes with suspicious brevity. It wakes up early and works late. It knows your deepest insecurities by name and has a particular gift for surfacing them at the worst possible moments. Right before you make an important phone call, right as you're drifting off to sleep, right when you're in the middle of something that requires your best. Most people relate to this voice as though it were them, as though every sentence it generates is an accurate report on reality rather than a running commentary shaped by years of accumulated programming, fear-based survival instincts, and the echoes of everyone who ever told you something about what you were and weren't capable of. It is not an accurate reporter. It is a deeply biased one, and learning to hear it clearly, without being hypnotized by it, is one of the most powerful skills you will ever develop. Where the voice came from, your internal dialogue did not arrive pre-installed as a neutral information system. It was built, voice by voice, message by message, from the people and environments that surrounded you during the most formative years of your development. Research from developmental psychology suggests that children internalize the voices of primary caregivers and authority figures not as external opinions to be evaluated, but as internal truths about the nature of reality. A parent who communicated, explicitly or through behavior, that the world was threatening, that failure was shameful, or that your needs were inconvenient, did not intend to install a hostile internal narrator. But the effect was the same. That voice knows how to sound like you. It speaks in your cadence, uses your memories as evidence, and mimics your logic. This is what makes it so difficult to identify as something separate from your actual perspective. But it is separate, and you can learn to tell the difference. The two voices test. Here is a practical diagnostic. Think about a significant goal you have right now, something you genuinely want but haven't yet achieved. Maybe it's building your own business. Maybe it's a health goal. Maybe it's a relationship you want, a level of income you're working toward, or a creative project you keep setting aside. Now, notice the thoughts that arise when you hold that goal in your mind. Write them down if you can. Most people will find two categories of thought. The first category is genuinely useful. I need to clarify my strategy. I should have that conversation I've been avoiding. There's a specific skill gap I need to address. These thoughts feel clear, actionable, and free of emotional charge. They are not always comfortable. Sometimes useful thoughts require confronting something you'd rather avoid. But they carry energy toward the goal rather than away from it. The second category is the voice. You've been here before, and it didn't work out. Other people can do this, but your situation is different. What if you invest everything and fail? What will people think? You're probably not as capable as you need to be for this. These thoughts have a particular emotional signature, a combination of urgency and deflation. They feel important, but they don't move you anywhere. They simply reinforce the status quo while dressed up as wisdom. The ability to distinguish between these two categories, useful signal versus old programming masquerading as insight, is a skill. It takes practice. And like any skill, it develops with deliberate effort. Reprogramming the narrator. Once you can identify your internal voice, as something you have rather than something you are, you have the leverage to change its content, tone, and relationship to truth. Change the tone first, then the content. Most people try to replace negative self-talk with positive self-talk and find it ineffective because the content changes, but the tone stays the same. A harsh, critical inner voice saying affirmations still sounds harsh and critical, and the brain registers the hostility beneath the words. Start by softening the tone before changing the message. Would you speak to a person you deeply respect and care for the way you speak to yourself? If not, begin there. Not because positivity is mandatory, but because the quality of your attention to yourself determines the quality of every other thought process. You cannot build a sovereign mind from a foundation of self-contempt. Upgrade the questions. The internal voice tends toward statements. I can't do this. I always mess up. This is too hard. Statements are closed systems. They arrive at a destination and stop. Questions are open systems. They initiate search processes. The voice that says, I always mess up, generates shame and stasis. The voice that asks, what would I do differently next time? And what has this experience taught me? Generates learning and momentum. The information content is similar. The destination is completely different. Deliberately replacing statement patterns with question patterns in your internal dialogue is one of the highest leverage shifts you can make, because questions engage the brain's problem-solving networks rather than its threat assessment networks. Give the limiting voice a name. This technique, used in various forms by executive coaches, therapists, and elite performance psychologists, involves deliberately creating a small separation between yourself and your most consistent limiting voice by naming it. Call it whatever you want. Some people use a slightly absurd name, which helps reduce the voice's perceived authority. Others use descriptive labels: the worrier, the critic, the historian. When the voice speaks, you can internally say, ah, there's the historian again, reviewing all the past evidence for why this won't work. This is not dismissing or suppressing the voice. It is creating the crucial gap between the voice and your identity, the gap where conscious choice lives. Create a personal dialogue protocol. High performers in every field have specific internal scripts they return to in high-pressure moments. A Navy SEAL platoon commander doesn't improvise his self-talk during a mission. He has practiced specific mental sequences for specific scenarios. An elite surgeon doesn't let random thoughts dictate their state during an operation. You can create the same architecture. Identify 3 situations where your limiting voice is most reliably active. Maybe it's when you receive critical feedback. Maybe it's in social situations where you feel evaluated. Maybe it's when you're making a significant financial decision. For each situation, write a 3-sentence internal dialogue protocol, not a suppression strategy. Don't think that, but a replacement navigation. When I notice this thought, pattern arising in this type of situation, I will respond with this internal sequence instead. Practice the protocol before you encounter the situation. Visualize it clearly. The goal is to have a deliberate internal response path ready before the heat of the moment, when the old voice is loudest and most persuasive. The narrative of your best self. Beyond managing the limiting voice, there is an even more powerful practice, actively constructing the internal narrative of who you are becoming. Not who you have been, not who others have said you are. The ongoing story of the person you are deliberately growing into. This narrative should be specific, personal, and emotionally resonant, not grandiose or detached from reality, but genuinely aspirational and grounded in evidence of your actual strengths, values, and growth trajectory. Some components of a sovereign inner narrative. I am someone who faces difficulty without needing it to be easy. This statement, held consistently, recalled in moments of challenge, rewires the relationship between difficulty and identity. Instead of challenge being evidence that something is wrong, it becomes confirmation of the story you're telling about yourself. I learn faster than I used to. This is almost certainly literally true, and it creates a forward momentum identity rather than a fixed trait identity. It opens the door to growth rather than defending a position. My past does not determine my ceiling. Said to yourself not as a pep talk, but as a neurological reality. Because, as Chapter 4 established, it literally is one. The internal narrative you hold about yourself is not cosmetic. It is structural. It determines which opportunities your RAS flags, which emotions your thought-emotion engine generates, and ultimately which actions you take or decline to take. Write your sovereign narrative. Read it every morning. Let it become the most familiar voice in your head, because you built it and it actually tells the truth. The spiral and the ladder, navigating negative thought storms. It starts small. An email arrives with feedback you weren't expecting. A conversation goes sideways. You step on the scale and the number is not what you wanted. A glance at a social media profile reminds you of a gap between where you are and where you want to be. And something shifts. A thought arises. Then another that's slightly darker. Then the first two thoughts seem to confirm each other, and a third appears that escalates further. Within minutes, what began as a single cloud is a weather system. You're not just having a difficult moment. You are someone whose life is a series of difficult moments. You are behind. You are failing. The current problem is evidence of a permanent condition. The spiral has begun. If you've experienced this, and if you're honest, you have, you know how real and how fast it moves. Cognitive behavioral researchers describe it as a cascade, a trigger thought that activates related negative cognitions, which generate negative emotions, which lower the threshold for additional negative thoughts, which generate deeper negative emotions, until the spiral is running at full speed on its own momentum. The spiral is not a character flaw. It is a feature of a nervous system that evolved to amplify threats in a world where missing a threat could be fatal. The problem is that the same system running in a modern information environment where perceived social threats, financial threats, and identity threats arrive dozens of times per day through our devices produces chronic activation of a system designed for occasional emergencies. Understanding the spiral doesn't make you immune to it, but it changes your relationship to it from helpless to capable. The physiology of the spiral. Before we discuss how to interrupt a negative thought spiral, it's worth understanding what is actually happening in your body when one begins. The moment a threat is perceived, even an imagined one, even a hypothetical one, the brain's threat detection center initiates a biological cascade. Cortisol and adrenaline are released. Heart rate increases. Blood flow shifts from the prefrontal cortex, rational thinking, nuance, problem-solving, to the limbic system, survival response, and the large muscle groups, fight or flight preparation. This means that as the spiral intensifies, you are literally losing access to the parts of your brain most capable of accurate assessment and effective response. The spiral creates the cognitive conditions that make it hardest to think your way out of the spiral. This is why willpower and rational argument rarely work against a fully engaged thought storm. You're fighting fire with a hose connected to a tap that the fire has already turned off. What does work is physiology first, cognition second. The ladder out, rung 1, the body override. Before attempting to change your thoughts, change your body state. The most direct route to breaking a stress cascade is through the vagus nerve, the neural superhighway connecting your brain to your body's rest and digest system. The most effective vagus nerve activator you have available at any moment, anywhere, without equipment. A slow, extended exhale. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 2. Breathe out for 8 counts. Repeat 4 times. This is not a metaphor for calming down. It is a direct physiological intervention that reduces cortisol, restores blood flow to the prefrontal cortex, and creates the neurological conditions in which clear thinking is possible. Do this before you attempt to address the content of the spiral. Trying to fix the thoughts while the cortisol is still flooding your system is like trying to read in a dark room and refusing to turn on the light. Rung 2. The observer activation. Once your physiology has stabilized slightly, invoke the observer you built in Chapter 1. Step back from the content of the spiral and observe it from a small distance. I'm in a negative thought spiral right now. It was triggered by X. The pattern I'm running is Y. This act of naming and framing activates the prefrontal cortex and reduces amygdala firing. You are not analyzing the spiral. You are simply seeing it clearly rather than being inside it. Rung 3. The reality check. From the observer position, ask one precise question. What is actually true right now? Not what might be true. Not what has been true in the past. Not what could become true. What is currently, verifiably, factually true about your situation. Most spirals, when examined from this angle, are revealed to be extrapolations built on a small piece of actual data. The feedback email was not complimentary. That is true. The conclusion that you are fundamentally inadequate and that your entire trajectory is compromised, that is not a fact. That is a spiral talking. Separating the actual event from the catastrophic interpretation is the moment the spiral loses most of its power. Rung 4. The redirect. With your physiology stabilized, your observer active, and the actual facts clear, you now have genuine cognitive choice. Choose a thought that is both true and forward-facing, not a denial of the difficulty, not a forced positive spin, a genuinely useful question or perspective that your actual situation warrants. What is one concrete step I could take today to address this? Or, what have I learned from this that makes my next attempt more likely to succeed? Or simply, this is hard, and I'm handling it. The spiral wanted to take you to a fixed, catastrophic conclusion. The latter returns you to process, to the ongoing, non-final, always continuing reality of someone who is figuring things out, which is what you are. The 24-hour rule for spirals of significance. For spirals triggered by significant life events, a major professional setback, a relationship rupture, a financial shock, the full ladder process works, but with one additional layer. The 24-hour rule. Do not make important decisions, send consequential communications, or take irreversible actions while in the active phase of a significant spiral. Not because your perspective will necessarily be wrong, but because access to the full range of your intelligence requires neurological conditions that a stress cascade actively compromises. In 24 hours, with sleep, with physical movement, with time and distance from the trigger, you will still have access to all the information and feelings you have now, but you will also have access to the parts of your brain that can process them accurately. The most damaging decisions most people make in their lives are made from the floor of a spiral, not because they're stupid or reckless, but because they were acting from a neurological state designed for survival, not for building the life you want. The 24-hour rule is not avoidance, it is precision. Mental immunity, building a mind that negativity cannot penetrate. Consider what happens in your body when you're exposed to a virus you've encountered before. Your immune system, primed by previous exposure and memory cells, identifies the threat rapidly and deploys a targeted response before the virus can establish itself. What would have once knocked you out for a week barely registers. This is the model for what we're building in this chapter, not a mind that is never exposed to negativity, You live in the world. Exposure is inevitable. But a mind that has developed such robust internal architecture that negative influences, whether external criticism, environmental toxicity, or internal fear spirals, cannot establish themselves long enough to do lasting damage. Mental immunity is the difference between a setback that ruins your week and a setback that you process and move through by Thursday. The contagion reality emotions are contagious. This is not a metaphor. Neuroscientist Giacomo Rizzolatti's discovery of mirror neurons revealed that human brains contain specialized cells that automatically mimic the emotional states of others in our vicinity. This mechanism evolved for good reason. Emotional attunement is the foundation of social bonding and cooperation, but it also means that spending extended time around chronically anxious, cynical, or hostile people produces measurable changes in your own neurological state, often without your awareness. You've experienced this. You've spent time with someone and walked away feeling inexplicably heavy, or sat next to a perpetually pessimistic colleague and noticed your own outlook darkening over weeks. This is not weakness or susceptibility, it's biology, and acknowledging it is the first step toward managing it intentionally. The energy audit. For 1 week, keep a simple log. Rate your mental and emotional state, energy, optimism, clarity, on a scale of 1 to 10 at 3 points each day, morning, midday, and evening. Note what you consumed in the hours before each rating. Not just food, information, conversations, media, and the specific people you interacted with. By the end of the week, patterns will emerge. Certain inputs reliably raise your state, others reliably deplete it. This data, your personal energy audit, is the foundation of an intentional mental environment strategy. Most people are stunned to discover how predictable these patterns are, and more stunned to realize how long they'd been allowing depleting inputs into their mental environment without conscious evaluation. The 3 tiers of mental environment management. Tier 1, the inner circle. The people you spend the most time with are the most significant environmental factor in your mental life. Not because you need to curate friends based on their cheerfulness, but because sustained exposure to certain patterns of thinking shapes your own defaults. This doesn't mean eliminating people who are struggling or going through difficult periods. That would be both impractical and contrary to the values of most people reading this. It means being conscious about the quality of thinking that dominates your core relationships. Ask yourself, who in your life consistently models a pattern of thinking you admire? Who approaches challenges with the resourcefulness and perspective you want to develop? Spend more time there, not to absorb positivity superficially, but to immerse your brain in the neural patterns that proximity gradually installs. Tier 2, the information diet. Your brain cannot distinguish between information that is immediately relevant to your life and information designed to hijack your emotional responses for clicks and engagement. The fear, outrage, and anxiety that certain media platforms deliberately manufacture produce the same neurological cascade as genuine personal threats. Managing your information diet is not about ignorance. It's about recognizing that unlimited, unfiltered consumption of algorithmically optimized emotional content is the cognitive equivalent of eating every meal from a drive-through window. Technically, food, not remotely nourishing. Establish input protocols, designated times for news consumption rather than continuous ambient exposure. Curation of social media feeds that removes algorithmically addictive content and prioritizes content that challenges and expands thinking. A ratio of inputs that produce clarity and capability versus inputs that produce anxiety and comparison. Tier 3, the physical environment. Your physical surroundings influence your mental state more than most people acknowledge. Clutter activates low-level cortisol. A workspace that doesn't reflect your values and aspirations generates subtle dissonance throughout the day. The view outside your window, the lighting in your home, the first thing you see when you wake up, all of these send constant signals to your nervous system. This doesn't require redesigning your home or office. It requires becoming conscious of what your environment is communicating to your brain and making deliberate adjustments in the direction of mental clarity, inspiration, and ease. The mental shield practice. Before entering environments you know to be mentally challenging, a workplace with corrosive culture, a family gathering with reliably toxic dynamics, a social situation where comparison loops tend to activate, spend 60 seconds on what we call the mental shield practice. Find a quiet moment. Take 3 deep breaths. Set a specific stated intention. I will remain grounded in my own perspective today. I can engage with this environment without being reshaped by it. I will notice when I start to absorb others' states and return to my own center. This is not magical thinking. It is priming, a well-documented psychological phenomenon in which brief exposure to a specific concept significantly increases the likelihood of that concept influencing subsequent processing. Setting an explicit intention before a challenging environment activates the neural networks associated with your stated commitment and makes them more readily available during the experience itself. Building resilience through voluntary challenge. One of the counterintuitive principles of mental immunity is that strength is built through appropriate exposure to challenge, not through protection from it. Just as the immune system requires exposure to pathogens to develop robust response capabilities, the mind develops mental immunity through navigating manageable difficulties, not by avoiding all discomfort. This means deliberately seeking experiences that stretch your comfort zone in controlled ways. Having the difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Pursuing the opportunity you keep dismissing as too uncertain. Exposing yourself to the feedback you've been dodging. Each successful navigation of a genuine challenge deposits into what might be called your resilience account. The account grows with use. The more challenges you've processed, the more confident your nervous system is that challenges can be processed, and the less each new difficulty activates the threat cascade that depletes your mental state. Comfort is not the goal. Capable is the goal. A sovereign mind is not one that has been sheltered from adversity. It is one that has learned, through accumulated experience, that adversity is survivable, navigable, and often generative. The focus paradox: why the most successful minds do less and accomplish more. In 2023, researchers at the University of California published a study with a finding that should have fundamentally disrupted how Americans relate to productivity. The average knowledge worker switches tasks every 3 minutes and 23 seconds, and after each interruption, it takes an average of 23 minutes to fully return to the previous level of focused engagement. Do the math. In a typical 8-hour workday, with task switching every 3 minutes, a worker never, not once, achieves the level of cognitive depth at which their best thinking actually happens. We have collectively built a culture of perpetual interruption and called it productivity. We have confused busyness with effectiveness. We have mistaken the sensation of mental activity for the substance of mental performance, and the cost is not just productivity, it is the quality of our thinking, which, as this entire book has argued, is the quality of our life. What deep focus actually is. When neuroscientists study states of peak cognitive performance, the conditions under which creative breakthroughs, complex problem-solving, and genuine mastery occur, they consistently find the same profile. single-point attention, low external stimulation, extended duration, emotional engagement with the subject matter, a state that researchers, including Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, have described as flow, the complete absorption of consciousness into a single activity. In flow states, the prefrontal cortex quiets certain self-monitoring functions, allowing more fluid access to the brain's associative networks. Pattern recognition accelerates. Novel connections form. The internal critic temporarily steps back. You are not just working harder, you are accessing a genuinely different quality of cognitive processing. Flow is not a luxury for artists and athletes. It is available in any domain of focused, skilled engagement. And its neurological signature, reduced stress hormones, increased dopamine and norepinephrine, heightened alpha and theta brainwave activity, is as measurable as any other biological state. The barrier to flow is not intelligence or talent. It is interruption. Building your focus architecture, the deep work block. Reserve 90-minute blocks of your day, at least one, ideally two, for cognitively demanding tasks with all notifications disabled and all context switching eliminated. Research on circadian rhythms and cognitive performance suggests that most people have peak focus capacity in the late morning, roughly 90 minutes after waking, following initial alertness. Identify your peak window and protect it with the seriousness of a non-negotiable appointment. During these blocks, single task, one project, one question, one problem. The discomfort you feel when you first commit to this, the urge to check email, to quickly look something up, to handle that one small thing, is your brain's conditioning speaking. That discomfort is not a signal that you need to check email. It is a signal that your attention muscle is being trained. The cognitive threshold practice. Begin each focus block by writing one specific question at the top of a page or document. Not a task, a question. What is the most important insight I need in order to move this forward today? Or, what assumption in my current approach might be wrong? Or, what would a genuinely creative solution to this look like? Questions engage. The brain's seeking circuits in a way that task lists don't. They create forward momentum and give your focus a specific directional target rather than an open-ended field to wander. The attention anchor. For moments when focus drifts, which it will, especially in early stages, establish a physical attention anchor. For many people, this is conscious awareness of breath. For others, it's a specific physical sensation, the feeling of feet on the floor, hands on a keyboard, the slight pressure of the chair. When you notice your attention has drifted, return it to the anchor. No self-criticism, just the simple act of returning. This is the same mechanism as meditation practice applied in the context of work. The transition ritual. The biggest drain on focus capacity is not sustained concentration, it is the cognitive residue from incomplete tasks and unresolved contexts that follows you from one activity to the next. You're in a conversation, but half your mind is still processing the email you were reading before. Develop a transition ritual, a brief, deliberate practice between different activities that signals to your brain that the previous context has been closed and a new one is opening. This might be 3 deep breaths, a 60-second walk, a brief note capturing any unresolved threads from the previous activity. The ritual doesn't need to be elaborate, it needs to be consistent. Consistency is what trains the brain to actually close one context before opening another. The counter-cultural truth about mental performance. Here is the thought that will likely be most uncomfortable for the high-achieving, perpetually striving reader of this book. Rest is not the absence of productivity, it is the foundation of it. The prefrontal cortex, the brain's seat of sophisticated reasoning, long-range planning, emotional regulation, and creative synthesis, requires genuine recovery periods to sustain peak performance. Not passive recovery, necessarily. Some forms of mental rest are active. Walking in nature, light physical movement, unfocused daydreaming, but recovery that is free from task-oriented cognitive demand. The default mode network, the brain system that activates during unfocused rest, is where insight incubates, where disparate pieces of information connect into new configurations, where your brain processes and integrates the learning from focused effort. When you eliminate rest and fill every moment with information consumption or task management, you don't get more done, you get less, because you're running the engine without ever filling the tank. The most cognitively productive individuals across every domain, from Nobel Prize-winning scientists to great novelists to transformative business builders, consistently demonstrate patterns of intense, focused work alternating with genuine rest. Not one without the other. Both in rhythm. A sovereign mind is not a constantly active mind. It is a selectively active one, fully engaged when engagement is called for, fully rested when rest is what the work requires. The visualization engine. How to rehearse your way to a different future. In the late 1970s, Soviet and East German Olympic programs began systematically incorporating a practice that Western coaching dismissed as scientifically dubious: mental rehearsal. Athletes spent significant training time not performing their events, but visualizing them, running through every detail of their performance in their mind's eye with the same focused intention they brought to physical practice. The results were so dramatically superior to programs relying on physical practice alone that Western sports science eventually had to confront an uncomfortable reality. The brain doesn't have a clean distinction between what is imagined and what is experienced. When you vividly imagine performing an action, with sufficient detail, emotional engagement, and sensory specificity, your brain generates neural activation patterns nearly identical to those produced by the actual performance. The motor cortex fires. The limbic system responds. The neural pathways associated with that action are strengthened, even in the absence of physical execution. This is not a performance trick. It is a fundamental feature of how the human nervous system processes experience. And it means that you have the ability to begin rewiring your brain for a different future right now, without waiting for the circumstances, the resources, or the opportunities that your current reality hasn't yet provided. The 4 conditions of effective visualization. Not all mental imagery is equal. Daydreaming about a desired future produces a pleasant feeling and minimal neurological change. Effective visualization, the kind that actually builds new neural pathways, requires 4 conditions. Specificity. The brain responds to detail. A vague image of being successful activates minimal neural machinery. A specific, fully rendered scene, where you are, what you're wearing, who else is present, what you're saying, how your body feels, what the environment sounds like, activates the same rich network of neural processes as lived experience. When you visualize, build the scene as a director builds a set. Don't sketch it in broad strokes, construct it in high resolution. Emotional engagement. Neurons don't wire on the basis of passive observation, they wire on the basis of emotional intensity. The more genuinely you can feel the emotions associated with your visualized outcome, the pride, the satisfaction, the confidence, the relief, the joy, the more powerfully those neural connections are reinforced. This is also why fear-based visualization, vividly imagining disaster, failure, humiliation, is so effective at creating exactly the outcomes it fears. You are not rehearsing what you want. You are rehearsing what you're afraid of. with full emotional engagement, and your brain builds accordingly. First-person perspective. There is a neurological difference between watching yourself succeed, third-person visualization, and experiencing yourself succeeding from the inside, first-person visualization. For performance preparation and self-concept work, first-person visualization is significantly more effective because it activates the specific neural networks associated with actually doing the thing rather than watching someone do it. Consistent repetition. As with all neural rewiring, repetition is the mechanism. 5 minutes of deliberate, specific, emotionally engaged first-person visualization, practiced daily, produces more lasting neural change than occasional sessions of intense mental imagery. The ritual matters less than the consistency. Morning, evening, before sleep, during a lunch break, whatever schedule you can genuinely sustain is the right schedule. The process and outcome architecture. There are two essential types of visualization, and both are necessary. Outcome visualization keeps you emotionally connected to where you're going. You see yourself having achieved the goal, fully, specifically, in high resolution. You feel the emotions of that achievement. You inhabit the version of yourself that exists on the other side of the work required. This type of visualization is motivationally powerful. It sustains effort through the inevitable difficult periods by keeping the emotional reward of the destination vivid and real. But outcome visualization alone has a documented flaw. Research by psychologist Gabriele Oettingen at NYU showed that people who only visualize positive outcomes without also visualizing the process and obstacles actually perform worse than people who don't visualize at all. The reason? Positive outcome visualization alone creates a neurological sense of partial completion, slightly reducing the motivational drive to take action. Process visualization addresses this. This is where you mentally rehearse the specific actions, decisions, and responses required to reach the outcome, including the challenges and how you navigate them successfully. You see yourself making the difficult phone call. You see yourself handling the rejection calmly and continuing. You see yourself in the moment of choosing between the easier path and the right one, and choosing the right one. The combination, outcome visualization for emotional fuel, process visualization for behavioral preparation, is what Olympic coaches and elite performance psychologists deploy, and it is available to you, starting tonight. Visualization as identity architecture. Beyond goal achievement, there is a deeper use for visualization that most people never access. Identity construction. Everything this book has argued about thought patterns ultimately comes back to self-concept, the story you hold about who you are. Visualization is perhaps the most powerful available tool for deliberately constructing a new self-concept rather than remaining bound by the one assembled from old experiences. The future self-visualization practice works like this. Choose a specific time horizon, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Now, construct a detailed visualization of yourself at that future point, having grown into the person you genuinely aspire to become. Not a fantasy version with perfect circumstances, a real version, one that has done the work, faced the difficulties, made the hard choices, and arrived at a new level of capability, character, and contribution. See that person in their environment. Notice how they carry themselves. Notice how they respond to pressure. Notice what they've released that your current self still carries. Notice what they have developed that your current self is still building. Now ask a question from within that visualization. What decision today would the person I'm becoming make? This question, regularly asked from a state of genuine, emotionally engaged future self-visualization, is one of the most consistently reliable generators of sovereign-minded decision-making available to a human being. You are not trying to become your future self through wishful thinking. You are using the neurological power of consistent mental rehearsal to begin building the actual neural pathways, the thinking patterns, the emotional responses, the automatic choices that your future self runs on. The architecture of who you will be is being built right now, in the thoughts you choose, in the stories you rehearse, in the version of yourself you practice inhabiting every single day. Mental habits, the daily architecture of the sovereign life. Every thought you've had today was, in some meaningful sense, a choice, not a conscious, deliberate, fully considered choice. Many of them arose automatically from the neural highways established by years of repetition. But a choice, nonetheless, in the sense that the thought was a pattern your brain had learned to generate under specific conditions, and you either questioned it or you didn't. The most powerful realization in this book, the one that, if truly absorbed, changes everything, is this: the person you are becoming is the sum of the mental choices you make on ordinary days, not the dramatic moments, not the life-changing decisions that seem to arrive occasionally from outside your normal routine. The ordinary choices, the Tuesday morning choices, the unremarkable moments when you decided, or forgot to decide, which thought to follow, which story to believe, which voice to amplify. Mental habits are the structures that make sovereign thinking sustainable, because willpower, the effortful, conscious selection of thoughts, is a limited resource. It depletes. It fluctuates with sleep, stress, blood, sugar, and 100 other variables outside your control. Mental habits, like all habits, eventually run automatically. The goal is to install habits that run in your favor. The habit architecture habit formation in the brain follows a three-part structure first described systematically by MIT neuroscientist Anne Gray-Beal: cue, routine, reward. The cue is the trigger that initiates the habit loop. The routine is the behavior, mental or physical, that follows. The reward is the positive outcome, emotional, physiological, or practical, that reinforces the loop and ensures it will run again. Building mental habits follows the same architecture. If you want to develop a habit of responding to challenges with curiosity rather than fear, you need to: 1. Identify and anchor to a cue, the specific type of situation that will trigger the new mental routine. For example, any time you feel resistance or apprehension about a task. 2. Define the routine clearly, the specific internal sequence you'll run when the cue fires. For example, pause, 3 breaths, ask, what's the most useful perspective on this? 3. Build in a reward, something that creates a positive signal in your brain immediately after the new routine runs. For example, the physical act of writing one insight you've gained or taking one concrete action step, both of which produce a mild dopamine response. The reward doesn't need to be elaborate. It needs to be immediate and consistent. Delayed or inconsistent rewards produce weak habit formation. Immediate, consistent rewards produce rapid and durable neural wiring. The 5 mental habits of sovereign minds. These are not the only valuable mental habits. They are the foundational 5, the ones that, when practiced consistently, create the neural architecture from which all other sovereign thinking skills grow. Habit 1. The morning intention. Before engaging with the external world, before checking your phone, before consuming news, before entering the flow of other people's demands, spend 5 minutes setting a deliberate mental intention for the day. Not a to-do list, an intention. Today, I will approach everything from a place of grounded confidence. Today, I will notice when I'm in a comparison loop and redirect. Today, I will take one action that scares me mildly. The morning brain is neurologically more receptive to new programming than the brain later in the day. Use that window. Habit 2, the midday check-in. At some point in the middle of your day, a lunch break, a transition between meetings, a brief walk, ask 3 questions. What's the dominant thought I've been running this morning? Is it serving me? What's one adjustment I want to make for the afternoon? This brief practice maintains conscious engagement with your mental state throughout the day rather than allowing autopilot to govern 12 unmonitored hours. Habit 3, the gratitude specificity practice, not generic gratitude. Specific present tense appreciation for something real and particular in your current life. The conversation with my daughter at breakfast, the client who gave me genuinely useful feedback, the fact that I chose the harder option yesterday and didn't collapse under it. Research from positive psychology consistently demonstrates that specific gratitude activates reward circuitry, reduces cortisol, and improves sleep quality, all of which directly support mental clarity and resilience. The specificity is essential because vague gratitude activates vague neural response. Specific gratitude activates specific, richly connected memory and emotion networks. Habit 4, the learning frame. Develop the reflexive habit of asking after any difficulty, failure, or uncomfortable experience. What is this teaching me? Not as a spiritual bypass that avoids the genuine difficulty, the pain of failure, the sting of rejection, the weight of significant setback is real and should not be dismissed. But alongside the emotional processing, the learning frame ensures that the experience is deposited as capital in your neural development account, rather than simply as evidence for the unworthiness loop. Every challenge you ever face either builds your mind or drains it. The learning frame is how you ensure it builds. Habit 5, the evening acknowledgement. Before sleep, identify one choice you made today that reflected the sovereign mind you're building. One moment when you chose the empowering thought over the limiting one. One instance of noticing an automatic pattern and redirecting. One small act of courage, integrity, or conscious intention. This is not self-congratulation. It is neurological reinforcement, the deliberate activation of your brain's reward systems in association with conscious thought sovereignty. What gets rewarded gets repeated. What gets acknowledged gets strengthened. The evening acknowledgement is how you teach your brain that's sovereign. Thinking is worth doing again tomorrow. The compound effect and the long game. Here is the truth that will serve you better than any specific technique in this book. The sovereign mind is not built in a peak experience. It is not achieved in a transformative weekend workshop or a revelatory conversation or an epiphany that feels, in the moment, like it has changed everything. Those experiences have value. They can plant seeds, shift perspectives, and open doors. But they are not the building. The building happens on ordinary Tuesdays, in the 5-minute morning intention you maintain when you're tired and unexcited about the day ahead. In the midday check-in you do briefly in a parking lot between appointments. In the evening acknowledgement, you practice even when the day has been genuinely hard, and the most honest answer to what did I do well today takes some real searching. Compound interest is exponential because it operates continuously, on accumulated principle. The mental habits you build operate the same way. Each consistent practice day adds to the principle of your neural architecture. The returns are small and invisible in the early stages. Then they become noticeable. Then they become remarkable. Then people who knew you before will say, and you'll hear this more than once if you do this work, "You seem different." What changed? What changed is that you stopped waiting for the world to arrange itself in a way that made it easy to think well, and started doing it anyway, on ordinary days, consistently. That is the sovereign mind. Your new reality starts with the next thought you choose. You've traveled far in this book. You've looked honestly at the mental operating system that's been running your life, much of it installed before you had the developmental capacity to question it. You've understood the neuroscience of how thoughts become neural highways, how those highways shape your emotional responses, your perceptions, your decisions, your outcomes. You've learned practical methods for interrupting patterns that no longer serve you, building new ones that do, and maintaining the mental environment that makes sovereign thinking sustainable. But knowledge, as you now know, is not change. The distance between understanding thought sovereignty and living it is covered only one way, through the next thought you choose. Not the perfect thought, not the thought you'll think when you've finished processing all of this, not the thought you'll select when circumstances cooperate and the timing is better. The next thought, now, in this life, in this body, in whatever circumstances currently surround you. The three commitments of a sovereign mind. As you close this book and re-enter the stream of your actual daily life, I want to leave you with three commitments that will serve as your North Star when the work gets difficult, which it will. Commitment 1. I am the observer, not the observed. No matter what thoughts arise, no matter how loud the limiting voice, how fast the spiral, how automatic the loop, there is a part of you that can step back and watch. That part is your sovereign self, and it is available to you in every single moment, including this one. The moment you remember that you are the observer, you have power. Not unlimited power, not instant transformation, but choice. The fundamental human capacity that makes everything else in this book possible. When you forget, and you will forget, everyone does, repeatedly and humanly, simply remember again. Without self-criticism, without drama, just remember, I am the observer. I have choice. Commitment 2. I tend the garden regardless of the weather. The mental garden does not ask for fair conditions before requiring attention. On the days when it's easy to think well, when life is going smoothly, you're rested, your circumstances are cooperating. Tending the garden is simple and even pleasurable. The sovereign mind is built on the other days, the days when you're depleted and the old patterns have the home field advantage, when the spiral is moving fast and the limiting voice sounds absolutely convincing, when the simplest thought management techniques feel abstract and impossible. On those days, breathe first, observe, name the pattern. Take the smallest available action toward the mind you're building. Even 1 minute of deliberate sovereign thinking on a genuinely hard day does more neurological work than 20 minutes on an easy one. Tend the garden, regardless of the weather. That is the whole discipline. Commitment 3. I am not waiting. This is perhaps the most important commitment, because the greatest opponent of the sovereign mind is not negativity, not limiting beliefs, not even the accumulated programming of decades. It is the quiet, seductive, endlessly creative story that the right conditions for change are almost here. When the workload lightens, when the relationship stabilizes, when the kids are older, when the finances are clearer, when the uncertainty resolves, when the timing is right. The timing is never coming. It does not exist. There is no future moment in which the conditions for building your sovereign mind will be more favorable than this present one. Because the only thing required to begin is a decision to observe the next thought that arises with intention. And that requires nothing you don't currently have. The waiting ends here, not because everything is perfect, not because you are ready, not because the path is clear, because you have chosen to stop waiting. And that choice, made now, remade tomorrow, recommitted to on every ordinary Tuesday for the rest of your life, is the only appointment you needed to keep. Your thoughts are not happening to you. They are happening through you, through the neural architecture you are consciously building, one deliberate choice at a time. You are the architect. Build something worthy of the mind you were given.